It was April of 2009, and it was my fourth day at the Meadows, a treatment facility for addiction and trauma. I was there to unload the trauma that was slowly killing me that I'd been carrying around for 15 years. I was surrounded by the Sonoran Desert high in the Arizona mountains. The sky was ablaze with tones of bright red as the sun illuminated the mountains as it was about to rise, completely breathtaking. The entire town was quiet, but not me. I had my shoes on and I was out the door for my morning walk. The sky, the mountains, the cactus, and the fact that I had not felt this free ever in my life had my heart wide open with gratitude as I walked. If you're new to Living Beyond Limits, welcome. And if you're returning, thank you for joining me today. In our last episode, we dove into why I'm so passionate about living a limitless life. And today, I want to share with you how I got there, because I believe that no matter what limitation or obstacle you're faced with, you can absolutely overcome it. I have, and I know that you can too. I want to offer up a content warning before we go any further. Friends, we can't talk about trauma and challenges we've faced without touching on very sensitive topics. This episode mentions the issues of addiction, self-harm, and other traumatic experiences that may be difficult for some listeners. I urge you to consider this warning when you decide when and where to listen to this episode. If you need help today, please reach out to your local crisis centers. As I mentioned in the last episode, life had been traumatic with a lot of incredibly difficult experiences to work through. I wasn't willing to face any of those experiences for a very long time. I thought I had dealt with them in my own way, but as the reality set in that I was a full-blown alcoholic and addict, it became apparent that was a thinking error. After spending a couple of years in recovery, it became increasingly clear that I had not dealt with any of my trauma, none, and that I had two choices. One, I could return back to active addiction, or two, I could face my past. Honestly, begrudgingly, I started the road of self-healing, which ultimately brought me to the Meadows for 2 intensive outpatient stays. I was there specifically to deal with my car accident because it seemed that no matter what I did to try to move on, the experience was just too big. 3 lives lost, and my sense of responsibility for it was too much for me to bear. I arrived at the Meadows terrified of what this experience would hold for me. I was afraid to open the door that I had shut and locked years before. I was certain, that my feelings would swallow me whole and that I would never be okay again. I'm not sure why I thought that living with thoughts of harming myself, white-knuckling not to drink, even though I had been sober for 6 years, and struggling through every other symptom of PTSD was normal, but it felt safer to stay with the misery that I knew rather than go into the unknown. There were some catalysts for my decisions. Everyone has to find their own why, their own will to make a change. For me, I saw every area of my life suffering, every single one. I was in pain. The people I loved were in pain with me and for me. So much had happened to me, and up until that point, I'd let my health or the accident or my addiction take everything from me. I felt like those things had stolen everything. But the truth was honestly far more complicated than that. Change started with looking at myself, believing that I could have some semblance of a normal life. That belief, that deep need for the life I wanted, brought me to take the hard steps and make big changes, like going to the Meadows where I could receive the intensive support I needed. The staff was amazing. They definitely knew exactly what it was they were doing. This was precisely what they were trained in, to deal with major trauma and to help people move through it. On the 3rd day, I'll never forget it. I did this huge piece of experiential work with my therapist, and it literally changed my life forever. The process that she walked me through allowed me to shift my perception about what had happened. I arrived at the Meadows fully convinced that I had killed 3 people. I left a week later understanding that was actually guilt and shame holding on to the pain of the trauma. What happened was truly an accident. Understanding that, though, didn't change how terrible the event was. It didn't change the loss everyone involved suffered. But what it did change was my perspective on whether I felt I deserved to live to be happy, and to thrive. I never felt so free in my entire life as I did that morning as I walked through the desert. Prior to that, I had started therapy 3 years after I got sober because I was presenting signs of chronic illness. The naturopath I was working with at the time said the reason I was sick was due to the unresolved trauma in my body. I gotta be honest, I didn't believe her for a minute, but I was so desperate to feel better. So I started therapy immediately. I have tried every modality that was ever brought to my attention. I never said no one time. I thought if it could possibly bring me relief, I'm willing to try it. And I gotta tell you, some were helpful while others didn't do much of anything. Sometimes, honestly, making things much worse for me. I've gone so far as to try the diets for depression and anxiety, different kinds of sheets on my bed, talking about what's bothering me and not talking about it. Everything that seemed like a viable solution, I've tried it. Finally, here we are, 30 years after the accident. I've put together all of the things that I've learned on my way. For many years, my friends who've been struggling in silence have reached out to me for support, resources, and guidance. After seeing the ways that my story and my struggles have helped so many other people, I made the really tough decision to put myself out there, to share who I am and what I've been through, because I want to help you and anyone that's still struggling, trying to find peace of mind, physical healing, or recovery from addiction. I know the path was so dark for me for so long. I couldn't see my way out or any chance that there would be any relief at the end of the tunnel. If you're like me, most days it didn't even seem clear why I kept going. Today, though, I know exactly why I kept going all of those years. And that's because I have transformed that suffering into meaning and purpose. We all suffer. It is a fundamental part of life. It is part of the human condition. The suffering, though, is meant to help us evolve, to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. Suffering presents two options for us. A, we can either become a victim to it and we let it ruin our lives by closing our hearts off, or B, we can find a way through and we allow it to transform us in a way that actually generates compassion and wisdom. I personally was okay with that victim route for a really long time. So if you're there today, I get it. I have zero judgment about whatever it is you've chosen for yourself. For me, it felt safer to stay there than to face it all. What I didn't know, though, is that if I was willing to show up in my own life, take my power back, and do the work, that I could have this unbelievably incredible life in every single way. What I'm here to share with you today is that no matter what your story is, that there is a way out. There are so many tools, modalities, and opportunities available that I want to share with you to help you live your very best life. What happened to you is not meant to bury you alive unless you choose that. There's a way forward, and I want to share the journey with you. Thank you so much for listening today. I always want to hear from my listeners, so please reach out to me on my website at marcylanglois.com. If you found this episode insightful or helpful, please share this with your community of people. Follow me on TikTok, Facebook, or Instagram in between episodes for small tidbits. Have an incredible week and be aiming to live beyond your limits.